Everyone believed the billionaire's only daughter was dying. Doctors had told him she had no more than 3 months left. Her father, devastated and desperate, threw every resource his fortune could buy at the problem. Specialists, private clinics, experimental programs, but nothing helped. But the girl remained distant, silent, fragile, fading while the world around them stayed meticulously ordered. Then, one ordinary morning, a new maid arrived. She was unremarkable at first glance, quiet, careful, methodical, a woman who kept to herself and quietly did her work. Yet as the days passed, she began to notice small things that everyone else overlooked. She paid attention to the pauses in conversations, the way the child reacted to sound, the little details that didn't match the official story. And when she began to dig, she found something that changed the whole picture. What she uncovered didn't merely bring a flicker of hope. Before we continue, please remember to subscribe and like the video. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love to know that. William Hargrove had been a titan in his field. Once celebrated for his sharp instincts and leadership, he built a network of companies that carried his name across industries. But after his wife's tragic death, everything altered. William retreated from boardrooms and lights, choosing to live instead on his private estate at the edge of Westport. The property was immaculate and modern, filled with high-end art and furnishings, but despite the beauty, it felt hollow. William rarely spoke. He kept other people at a distance. He focused on only one thing: his daughter, Maya. Maya's illness had begun when she was still very small. The diagnosis had been brutal, a form of childhood cancer that left the family reeling. The treatment scarred her body, hair lost, energy drained, and the days dissolved into long routines of pills, infusions, and quiet monitoring. William stayed at her side as if he could hold back time. Every medicine, every consultation, every new therapy was his responsibility. Yet no matter how present he remained, Maya spoke very little. She kept to herself, often staring blankly as though her thoughts were somewhere else. William spared no expense trying to bring joy back into Maya's life. He hired the most respected doctors, therapists, and specialists. He booked art instructors, arranged music sessions, even brought animals in for therapy to see if a living creature might coax a reaction. He filled her world with books and toys, anything that hinted at interest. But these attempts produced nothing. Maya did not laugh. She did not play. She did not reach out. Frequently she would sit for hours by the window, staring at nothing or drawing simple, spare pictures. For William, each quiet moment was a fresh wound. He had once been a man who solved problems. Now every plan failed to close the distance between father and child. Each morning William lived a disciplined life. He woke early, prepared breakfast for Maya, administered and double-checked medications, and kept meticulous notes on her responses. Nurses came daily to support them, but William insisted on remaining involved in every decision. He would watch her sleep, check dosages, and log every small reaction in a leather-bound notebook. Order, he believed, could protect them. Clean sheets, scheduled meals, punctual doctors. All of it was his attempt to manage the unmanageable. Yet the tidy routine could not fix what lay underneath. The silence in the house felt heavier than any noise. Maya rarely spoke. At times she would nod or give a fleeting look, but most hours passed without a sound. Still William persisted. He searched for any sign of return, a flicker of attention, a brief smile, and held on to those fragments as if they were proof she might come back. He replayed memories, their home once full of laughter, the small hands that had once pointed at everything with endless questions. That life seemed unreachable now. He carried blame close to his chest. William wondered if different choices could have kept his wife alive, or if another action might have spared Maya this suffering. Family photographs lay folded in a drawer he seldom opened, each image cut deeper than the last. Nights were the worst. While the house slept, William would sit alone in his study, staring into the dim room, thinking of the past as if it were a crime scene he could analyze and solve. The outside world, friends, business calls, had fallen away. Only Maya remained, and though he did all he could, the silence between them remained unbroken. The estate was vast, but William and Maya used only a few rooms. He painted Maya's bedroom in her favorite shade, stacked soft blankets and stuffed animals, and arranged gentle music to play through the day. Sometimes Maya drew spare, melancholic sketches of clouds and empty trees, and William kept them as if they were maps to her inner life. He tried to conjure normalcy by inviting old acquaintances to visit. The visits dwindled. The one constant was the silence, and it felt like a wall between them. Evelyn Clark arrived at the Hargrove estate carrying little but a quiet steadiness. She had lost her own newborn months before, a grief that had narrowed her world to careful routines and small, careful acts. The job posting had asked for patience and responsibility. Evelyn had applied without thinking, drawn by the subtle promise of working with a child. When she stepped inside the house for the first time, she felt the hush the way others felt a chill, a presence. She didn't come in with bright promises. She came with hands that wanted to help, and eyes that knew what silence could do to a person. In the first few days, Evelyn kept to the background. She tidied the kitchen, polished shelves in the study, and carried supplies when the nurse made her rounds. She didn't rush to interact with Maya. Instead, she watched. The girl remained by her window, pale and slight, hardly acknowledging anyone who passed. She asked for nothing, offered nothing, but Evelyn noticed details. Maya avoided eye contact when people spoke. She seemed not only weak, but utterly alone. What struck Evelyn was that the emptiness in Maya's eyes wasn't just illness. It was something deeper. Evelyn recognized it instantly. She herself had lived in that hollow place after losing her daughter. It wasn't simply pain. It was the silence of someone who had lost more than words could explain. To Evelyn, Maya wasn't just a fragile child. She was someone standing at the edge of the same void. Evelyn's approach was subtle. She folded a blanket neatly at the foot of Maya's bed. She set a vase with soft-colored flowers on the nightstand. She placed a little music box nearby, letting the tune play without comment. When she noticed Maya tilt her head ever so slightly toward the sound, Evelyn took it as a beginning. Sometimes Evelyn sat in the hallway outside Maya's room, reading quietly. She didn't press. She didn't force cheerfulness. She wanted Maya to feel presence without pressure. And little by little the girl responded. A glance, a held gaze. These were fragile gestures, but Evelyn treated them as gifts. She returned each with a gentle smile, never breaking the fragile trust that seemed to be forming. William, always observant, saw these changes. At first he said nothing. He simply noticed that Evelyn was different from the others who had come and gone. She didn't try to dazzle or force happiness. She didn't offer grand solutions. She was steady, quiet, consistent. She treated Maya with respect, not pity, and for the first time in months, William felt a shift in the air. One evening, William paused outside Maya's door. Through the crack, he saw his daughter holding the music box Evelyn had given her. It was the first time he had seen her reach for something on her own in months. That night, he asked Evelyn to join him in his study. He didn't give a long speech. He simply thanked her, his words spare but heavy with meaning. "Just keep being yourself," he said. Evelyn nodded. That was all he needed. As days turned into weeks, Evelyn and Maya built an unspoken language. Maya allowed Evelyn to brush her hair, to sit beside her, sometimes even to hand her a pencil, and later find drawings waiting on the desk. They weren't conversations, but they were exchanges. Small, significant shifts that spoke of growing trust. Evelyn wasn't looking for miracles. She knew healing was patient work, but she also knew that connection, no matter how small, could become a lifeline. William noticed his own role changing too. He had built his empire on control, on commanding outcomes. Yet here, outcomes came in whispers. The way Maya's hand lingered in his, the way she held Evelyn's gaze. He realized he could not force his daughter back into life. He could only wait at her side. The silence remained, but it was no longer absolute. It was beginning to break in the smallest of ways. Evelyn carried her own private grief quietly through these days. She had buried her infant not long before. Every room in her old apartment had been heavy with reminders. But here, at the Hargrove estate, she found a mirror of that silence. The difference was that she could do something for Maya, even if she couldn't bring back her own child. Caring for this girl was not just a job. It became a form of healing she hadn't expected. Weeks passed, and Maya's world began to bend just slightly toward Evelyn. Then one afternoon, while brushing the faint strands of Maya's regrown hair, Evelyn heard a voice. "It hurts. Don't touch." "Mommy!" The brush froze in Evelyn's hand. She looked at Maya, who kept her eyes on the floor, clutching the edge of her shirt. Evelyn set the brush down gently. "All right, we'll stop for now," she said softly. She didn't press for answers. She didn't push. But inside, her mind raced. Maya had barely spoken in months, and now she had not only spoken, but spoken with fear and called her mommy. The word echoed inside Evelyn like a bell. For her, it was both a wound and a signal. She knew grief. She knew memory. But there was something about Maya's tone that suggested more than confusion. It felt like a fragment of something hidden, and Evelyn couldn't ignore it. Evelyn walked out of Maya's room slowly, her footsteps almost mechanical, her thoughts racing far ahead. That single word, spoken with such raw fear, kept echoing. Mommy. Was it simply a slip, the result of longing for her late mother? Or was it a fragment of something Maya had lived through, something more complicated? She remembered what William had told her on the first day, that Maya's mother had died years ago. Yet the way the girl had spoken felt too immediate, too personal, as though she were reliving a moment. Evelyn tried to push the darker thoughts aside, but the unease stayed. In the days that followed, Evelyn sharpened her attention. She didn't let her new awareness show, but she observed carefully. She noticed that Maya often flinched at sudden movements. Sometimes she tensed if someone passed behind her. And though subtle, Evelyn saw the way Maya's body seemed to shrink whenever William entered the room. It wasn't dramatic. It was small, like a shadow falling, but Evelyn noticed. One evening, while sorting through books in William's study, Evelyn discovered a dusty photo album tucked behind thick folders. She opened it quietly. Inside were photographs of William, a smiling woman, and a baby. The woman must have been William's late wife. The images radiated warmth and happiness. But after only a few pages, the photos stopped. No school pictures, no birthdays, no milestones of Maya's childhood. The album ended abruptly, as if the rest of her life had been cut out. Evelyn closed it and replaced it carefully, but the emptiness pressed at her mind. She began to sense that the silence in this house was more than grief. It was deliberate. Something was being hidden. Her instincts led her further. While cleaning near the service basement one afternoon, Evelyn found a closet stacked with old cardboard boxes. The labels were faded, but some bore Maya's name. Inside were bottles, syringes, vials with medical labels. Many of the drugs were unfamiliar, some with warnings printed in bold red. Evelyn took photos discreetly with her phone. That night, once Maya was asleep and the house was silent, Evelyn searched the names. Some medications were standard for cancer care, but others, they were listed as experimental, restricted, or suspended in several countries. Side effects included organ damage, hormonal collapse, even neurological disruption. Her heart sank. Maya wasn't just sick. She might have been harmed. The thought shook Evelyn deeply. Was William aware of these treatments, or had he trusted blindly? She wanted to believe he was innocent, a desperate father misled. But she couldn't ignore the possibility that he knew more than he admitted. For days, she watched the nurse administer Maya's daily doses, silently memorizing labels and dosages. She compared them to what she had seen in storage. Some matched. The realization made her stomach twist. She started a notebook, recording times, names of medicines, and Maya's reactions. Her notes became a quiet shield, a way to grasp control in a situation that was spiraling beyond her comprehension. But she couldn't hold the secret forever. She needed answers. She needed proof. On her next day off, Evelyn took one vial from the storage cabinet. Wrapped in cloth, hidden in her purse, she carried it to the Harper Clinic, run by Dr. Anna Harper, her trusted friend from the past. Dr. Harper agreed to test it. 2 days later, Evelyn got the call. Dr. Harper's voice was flat, restrained. "Evelyn, you were right to be worried. The dosage inside this vial is 3 times higher than safe levels, and it's a drug reserved for rare adult treatments. Not for children, not for daily use." Evelyn's hands shook as she listened. The substance could cause exhaustion, organ damage, even suppression of normal brain function. And Maya had been receiving it for months, maybe years. Evelyn sat down, trembling. The truth was worse than she imagined. Someone had knowingly put Maya in danger, and all the prescriptions carried the same name, Dr. Marcus Rowan. Evelyn couldn't shake the chill in her chest. Dr. Marcus Rowan, the physician William had trusted since Maya's diagnosis, had signed every prescription. She remembered his visits, his polite but distant manner, the way he used technical language that made it hard to ask questions. At the time, she had dismissed her unease as grief coloring her perception. Now she saw it for what it was, a carefully constructed wall to keep people from looking too closely. The next evening, Evelyn sat across from William in his office, the vial test report in her hand. She slid the document toward him. William read slowly, his expression stiffening. His voice, when it came, was hollow. "I trusted him," he whispered. "He said he could save her." Evelyn steadied her tone. "We need to know more. This isn't just treatment. It's dangerous." For the first time since she had known him, William looked less like a powerful man weighed down by grief, and more like a father who had been tricked. They began digging. William used his network of contacts. Evelyn searched through forums and archives. Piece by piece, a picture formed. Dr. Rowan had a history, old investigations, legal disputes, stories of children who suffered severe side effects under his care. In one case, a young boy developed heart failure after receiving a similar cocktail of medications. The case had been silenced quietly, no charges filed. But the evidence was there. Evelyn felt her anger rise. How could a man like Rowan still be practicing? Each record she uncovered deepened her conviction. This wasn't an isolated mistake. This was a pattern. The betrayal hit William hard. He had followed Rowan's instructions faithfully, believing each step was part of saving Maya. Now he realized he might have been complicit in harming her. Evelyn did not blame him openly. She knew what desperation could do. But the weight of guilt pressed visibly on him. From that point forward, their work became a mission. Evelyn kept detailed notes, cross-referenced medication names, documented Maya's responses. William pulled company records, payment logs, correspondence. They discovered Rowan had financial ties to pharmaceutical companies conducting quiet trials. Vulnerable children, like Maya, had been turned into test subjects without consent. The truth was staggering. This wasn't merely malpractice. It was exploitation. Together, they brought their findings to Attorney Blake, who guided them to District Attorney Morales. The prosecutor listened carefully, studying the documents, and agreed to open a formal investigation. For the first time, Evelyn and William felt they weren't alone, but as soon as the investigation stirred, the pushback began. Anonymous messages slipped under Evelyn's car windshield, telling her to stop digging. William was smeared in online articles as an absent father who ignored his daughter's suffering. Rumors spread that Evelyn had manipulated her way into the estate to gain influence. These were lies, carefully planted, but they spread quickly. William was furious. Evelyn, calmer, reminded him, "If they're fighting this hard, it means we're hitting close to the truth." Neither of them backed down. Meanwhile, something remarkable was happening inside the estate. Maya began to change. With several of the harshest medications stopped quietly by William, her body showed signs of recovery. She ate more, asked for a colouring book, even requested Evelyn to read aloud. One afternoon, William saw her smile, a real, unforced smile. It was the first in months. The smile was more powerful than any medical chart. It was proof that hope still lived inside her. Outside, the battle grew louder. Inside, small miracles unfolded daily. Evelyn brushed Maya's hair without resistance now. Sometimes the girl leaned her head on her shoulder or touched her hand gently. She didn't speak often, but the silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like healing. William began to see what he had missed all these years. His daughter's illness wasn't just physical. The silence had been deepened by years of over-medication, by grief, by fear. And now, slowly, with Evelyn's quiet presence, Maya was beginning to return. For William, that realization was crushing and liberating. He could not undo the past, but he could choose differently now. He would stand beside Evelyn, not only as a father, but as an ally in uncovering the truth. The fight against Rowan had only just begun. Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn and William's quiet investigation grew into a case strong enough to rattle powerful walls. Attorney Blake gathered the documents, medical reports and testimony from Dr. Harper, who had verified the drug tests. Families who had once remained silent now began to step forward cautiously. Some had children harmed in similar ways. Others carried grief from losses they had been forced to bury quietly. The deeper they dug, the clearer the pattern became. Dr. Marcus Rowan was not just careless. He had been conducting unofficial trials, testing unapproved pharmaceuticals on children too vulnerable to question the treatments. Payments from companies appeared in his accounts. The family's pain had been turned into data for corporate profit. News outlets caught wind of the unfolding story. At first the reports were small, whispers on local channels. But as evidence spread, headlines grew bolder. National coverage picked up the case. Rowan's defenders scrambled, but the tide of truth was pushing forward. With the public light came new dangers. More articles appeared smearing William as negligent, as a man so lost in wealth that he abandoned his daughter's care. Evelyn, too, was targeted. Some outlets called her an opportunist who had manipulated a grieving family for attention. Social media accounts spread lies faster than the truth could catch up. Threatening notes appeared at the estate gate. Anonymous calls warned them to stop. William seethed, but Evelyn steadied him. "This is what happens when you strike something rotten," she said. "It fights back. We can't let it scare us." They refused to retreat. Inside the estate, while the outside world turned noisy and hostile, something beautiful was unfolding. Maya, though still fragile, showed more life each day. She laughed softly when Evelyn played gentle tricks during their games. She smiled when William brought her favorite pastry from town. She even asked to step outside into the garden, something she hadn't done in nearly a year. The old swing that hung from a tree swayed as she sat, Evelyn pushing gently, William watching with quiet awe. For the first time, the estate grounds were filled with movement and sound that weren't forced or planned. They were natural. Each improvement filled William with conflicting emotions: joy, relief, guilt. He often whispered, "I should have seen it sooner." Evelyn reminded him firmly, "What matters is now. You're here. She's healing." Maya noticed more than they realized. One evening, as Evelyn tucked her into bed, the girl whispered, "You and Daddy are brave." It was only a few words, but for Evelyn it was like hearing the future open. For William it was a lifeline. His daughter recognized his effort, his fight. Together, William and Evelyn had become something neither expected: a team. Not just allies against Rowan, but protectors of Maya's fragile recovery. The legal battle was daunting, but inside their walls they found strength in small victories. Laughter, drawings, soft words, shared meals, the estate. Once suffocating with silence, began to breathe again. But Evelyn knew the hardest part was still ahead. Rowan was not just one doctor. He represented a system that had allowed greed to pass as medicine. And to bring him down, They would have to face the full weight of that system, in the courtroom, under the eyes of the world. The fight was no longer about one child. It had become something much bigger. By the time the case reached the Westport courthouse, Rowan's name was already on national broadcasts. Reporters camped outside the building, cameras flashing as families gathered to testify. Signs demanding justice filled the sidewalks. Inside, the courtroom was packed, every seat taken. Parents clutched photos of their children, some living with chronic damage, others gone too soon. Evelyn and William sat in the front row, their hands resting together on the bench. They were no longer just grieving individuals. They had become symbols of resistance. Evelyn was called to the stand first. She carried a slim folder but barely glanced at it. Her voice was calm, clear and steady as she described finding the hidden vials, contacting Dr. Harper, and learning of the devastating dosages. She recounted how Maya's health had shifted when some of the medications stopped, proof that Rowan's treatments had contributed to her decline. She explained Rowan's history, the legal disputes, the questionable practices, with measured precision. The courtroom listened in silence. When Evelyn stepped down, she returned to William's side. He squeezed her hand, his eyes heavy with gratitude. William was called next. For a man once known for commanding boardrooms, the witness stand was a different stage. He spoke without flourish. His words were raw. He admitted he had trusted blindly, followed every recommendation without question. He confessed to feeling consumed by guilt, to realizing too late that his obedience had nearly destroyed his daughter. "I thought doing everything the doctor said was the safest path," he said quietly. "But blind trust is dangerous. My daughter paid the price." He didn't cry, but the weight in his voice was enough. Members of the jury nodded. Even reporters scribbling notes seemed subdued. His honesty was disarming. The prosecutor built the case piece by piece, calling parents one after another. Each story added force: seizures, organ damage, unbearable fatigue, children who would never live fully because of Rowan's decisions. The pattern was undeniable. Maya was not brought to court. She was still recovering, and both William and Evelyn knew the media frenzy would only hurt her. Yet her presence was felt. On the third day, a simple drawing of hers was submitted into evidence. It showed a little girl without hair standing between two figures holding hands. Beneath it she had written, "I feel safe now." The courtroom went quiet. Some wiped tears. The sketch was not medical evidence, but it was human evidence, a reminder of what the case was about. Day after day, testimony stacked into a tower of truth. Rowan sat at the defense table, stone-faced, showing little reaction. His lawyers attacked credibility, questioned memories, twisted details. But the tide was too strong. The family's voices formed a chorus that couldn't be silenced. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 2 days. When they returned, the room held its breath. Guilty on all counts, there was no explosion of noise. Instead, a release, quiet sobs, sighs of relief, the sound of shoulders lowering. Rowan sat frozen. The judge delivered a long sentence and announced that new legislation would be drafted to regulate experimental treatments, especially for children. Evelyn and William embraced their attorney. They didn't speak much. There were no triumphant speeches, just a shared understanding that something impossible had been done. Back at the Hargrove estate, the air felt entirely different. For the first time in years, the walls carried warmth instead of silence. Maya's laughter, soft but steady, drifted through the halls. She spent afternoons in the garden, sketching under the trees, calling for Evelyn to join her. William walked with them often, no longer a ghost, but a father fully present. The battle had ended in court, but their real victory was here, in the fragile return of a childhood once thought lost. The months after the trial passed with a new rhythm. For the first time in years, life at the Hargrove estate felt normal. William woke up not to crushing silence, but to Maya's voice asking what was for breakfast. Evelyn prepared lunches, sometimes with Maya's help. the girl proudly arranging fruit into small patterns. The legal fight had taken its toll, but what grew in its place was healing. Maya's health continued to improve. She still required checkups, but her strength returned little by little. She played outside, read aloud with Evelyn, and even teased William for overcooking eggs. Each small act was a miracle. One morning, William and Evelyn discussed the future. "She deserves more than this estate," Evelyn said softly. "She deserves a real childhood." William nodded. "It's time." They enrolled Maya in Westport Elementary, a decision that filled them all with nerves. On the first day, William drove her to school. Evelyn packed her lunch, tucking a small note inside with a hand-drawn flower. Maya clutched her backpack tightly, her eyes wide but determined. To their relief, the transition was smoother than expected. Maya's classmates welcomed her. Her teachers recognized her talent in drawing almost immediately. Her notebooks filled with colors and lines, images of gardens, of quiet rooms, of people holding hands. She was no longer silent. She answered questions, raised her hand, even told jokes that made other children laugh. For William and Evelyn, seeing her like this felt surreal. They had once feared she might not live long enough to step into a classroom. Now she was thriving. Her art blossomed into more than a hobby. She joined a small art group at school, where her drawings stood out for their depth and emotion. One day, the school counselor nominated her for a national award recognizing courage in young students. When Maya walked onto a stage to accept her medal, the room applauded. She smiled proudly, the medal gleaming in her hand, while her other hand held tightly to Evelyn's. Reporters captured the moment, and soon her story spread. Letters arrived at the estate, from children who were sick, from parents who had lost, from strangers inspired by her resilience. Maya read them carefully, sometimes writing back in simple words and sketches. She was becoming a voice of hope, even at such a young age. Then, one afternoon, Evelyn was invited to attend what she thought was a routine school assembly. She sat among other parents waiting. But when Maya stepped onto the stage, holding a small envelope, Evelyn sensed something different. A representative from Child Services stood beside her. Maya's voice carried across the auditorium. "Today I want to share something important. Evelyn has always been more than someone who takes care of me. She's my mother in every way that matters." Gasps spread through the audience. Evelyn froze, her hand covering her mouth. The representative announced that the adoption papers had been finalized. Evelyn Clark was now, officially, Maya's mother. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face as she walked to the stage. Maya ran into her arms, and the two held each other tightly while the audience clapped, some weeping, others smiling. William stood nearby, applauding with tears in his eyes. That day marked more than a legal change. It was a seal on the bond they had already built, a bond born in silence, strengthened by truth, and confirmed by love. Back at the estate, they celebrated quietly. William cleared a room overlooking the garden and transformed it into Maya's art studio. Bright light filled the space. Shelves lined with paints and canvases surrounded a sturdy desk by the window. Maya immediately set to work, her brushes moving with confidence. Her drawings shifted in tone. No longer just sad trees or empty skies, but vibrant colors, gardens alive with movement, families standing together, houses filled with light. Each canvas told a piece of her journey. For Evelyn, watching Maya create was watching her soul heal. For William, it was seeing his daughter reclaim a future once stolen. Years passed with a quiet but powerful momentum. Maya grew into her teenage years, her body stronger, her spirit unshaken. The trauma of the past never vanished completely, but it had been transformed into something else: resilience. Her art continued to flourish. She spent hours in her studio, brushes staining her hands, sketches piling up in folders, canvases drying against the walls. When the time came, she applied to art school. Her portfolio, filled with scenes of gardens, tender portraits of William and Evelyn, and haunting but hopeful depictions of hospital rooms, earned her a scholarship. Evelyn helped her pack while William drove her to campus, both hiding their tears behind encouraging smiles. Saying goodbye was bittersweet. Evelyn fussed over small things. "Call me every Sunday. Eat properly. Don't stay up too late." William tried to hide his emotions, but his hands lingered on Maya's shoulders longer than usual. Maya hugged them both fiercely before walking into her dormitory with her sketchbook under her arm. Though the estate felt emptier, it also felt fulfilled. They knew Maya was stepping into the world not as a broken child, but as a young woman ready to create. Several years later, invitations arrived in elegant envelopes. Maya was holding her first professional exhibition at Ridgeview Gallery in downtown Westport. The opening night was filled with people, critics, strangers, fellow artists, friends. The white walls carried her story in images. One canvas showed a little girl curled in a hospital bed. Another depicted a woman, Evelyn, sitting beside her, hand gently resting on hers. Others were bursting with color, gardens alive with blooms, skies glowing with sunrise, children laughing. The progression was clear, from pain to hope, from silence to voice. As guests moved through the gallery, Maya stood at the front with a microphone in hand. Her voice was clear, confident. "People think my strength came from medicine," she said, "but my true strength came from Evelyn's heart. She loved me when I was hard to love. She stayed when I didn't ask. She became the light I followed." The room fell silent. Then came the applause. Not the polite clapping of an art show, but the deep, resonant response of people moved. Evelyn wiped her eyes, while William smiled with pride. Others cried openly. It wasn't just an exhibition. It was a testimony. Every piece on the wall told not only Maya's story, but the story of every child who had once been silenced. Her art became a voice for those who couldn't yet speak. After the event, William, Evelyn, and Maya walked together through the night streets of Westport. They didn't need words. The warmth between them was enough. They knew that what began as a tragedy had been remade into something unshakable. The little girl who once whispered in silence had grown into a woman who painted with clarity and courage. Her past was still part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had reshaped it into beauty. For William, it was redemption. For Evelyn, it was healing. For Maya, it was freedom. The years after the exhibition brought new rhythms to each of their lives. Maya continued to grow as an artist, her work gaining recognition beyond Westport. Critics praised her for her raw honesty and emotional depth, and galleries from other cities began requesting her collections. She traveled for showcases, always sending postcards back to the Hargrove estate, sketches of train stations, flowers, bustling streets, reminders that no matter how far she went, she carried her home with her. For William, the transformation was profound. The guilt that had once consumed him never fully disappeared, but it softened. He no longer saw himself as a man defined by failure. He had become the father who chose differently, who fought when it mattered, who listened instead of commanding. His companies remained in the background, managed by trusted partners. His true focus was on being present, something he had once thought impossible. Evelyn, too, changed. No longer just a caretaker or housekeeper, she had become what Maya declared years earlier, her mother. She took pride in every milestone. Each new painting, each gallery invitation, each letter Maya wrote to children who reached out for encouragement. Evelyn's own grief, the wound of losing her infant, had healed through the bond she had with Maya. What once was emptiness had been filled with a love she had never expected. The estate itself reflected this renewal. Once sterile and silent, it now buzzed with warmth. Music often played from Maya's old studio, now used whenever she returned home for breaks. The garden bloomed with color, tended carefully by Evelyn and William together. The swing swayed in the breeze, a reminder of the days when Maya had sat weak and silent, and of how far she had come. But the fight that began with Rowan's trial never truly left their minds. Even as life moved forward, Evelyn and William continued supporting advocacy groups that fought for stricter regulations on experimental drugs. They attended meetings, spoke quietly at conferences, and funded initiatives to protect children from exploitation in the medical system. What had started as a desperate personal mission had become part of their larger purpose. Maya, now older, often joined them. She spoke at youth events, sharing her story with honesty. "I once believed silence was my only voice," she told one gathering. "But someone stayed with me long enough to prove otherwise. And now I want every child to know, your voice matters. Even if you whisper, someone will hear." Her words carried the same weight as her paintings. Both were proof of survival, and both inspired change. Letters poured in not only from children but from adults, parents, doctors, teachers, who found courage in her story. Inside the estate, life was simple, but it was rich. Dinners together, conversations by the fire, evenings spent looking over Maya's newest sketches. Laughter came easily. Silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. The man who once thought order and wealth could save his daughter had learned a harder truth. Love, patience, and presence were the real medicine. And the woman who once walked into the estate quietly, just looking for work, had become its heart. They had survived betrayal, grief, and fear. Now they lived with something greater, hope that continued to grow. By the time Maya entered her 20s, her name was appearing in national magazines. Critics described her paintings as a bridge between pain and resilience, and her exhibitions drew crowds in cities far from Westport. Yet despite the acclaim, she remained grounded. She returned home often, spending time at the Hargrove estate where everything had begun. One summer evening, after hosting a successful show in another state, Maya sat with William and Evelyn in the garden. The air was warm, the swing moved gently in the breeze, and fireflies glimmered in the twilight. "Do you ever think," Maya asked softly, "about how different life could have been if we hadn't found the truth?" William nodded, his expression heavy. "I think about it every day, and I thank God we did." Evelyn reached for Maya's hand. "The past is still part of you, but it doesn't own you. You turned it into something beautiful." Maya smiled faintly. "Because you stayed." It was true. Their bond had been tested by darkness, but it had endured. William no longer lived under the shadow of grief alone. Evelyn no longer carried her pain in silence. And Maya no longer faced her illness as a fragile child trapped in despair. Together, they had remade their world. Their influence extended far beyond their estate. The case against Dr. Rowan had sparked reform. Laws regulating experimental treatments were strengthened. Hospitals adopted new oversight protocols. Parents became more cautious, asking questions they once felt too intimidated to voice. And through advocacy groups, Evelyn and William helped other families navigate fear and uncertainty. For Maya, this legacy was inseparable from her art. She began incorporating advocacy into her exhibitions, sometimes donating portions of sales to charities supporting sick children. She visited schools and clinics, sharing her story. "Hope isn't something you wait for," she told one group of children. "It's something people give to each other." Her words carried a quiet authority, forged in survival. At home, life remained simple and warm. Evelyn cooked. William read aloud in the evenings. Maya painted late into the night. Sometimes they sat by the fire, not speaking, just sharing space. Silence was no longer emptiness. It was comfort. One autumn, Maya returned to Westport Elementary, not as a student, but as a guest speaker. The teachers who once guided her now sat proudly as she told her story to a new generation. Afterward, a little girl with thin hair from chemotherapy hugged her tightly and whispered, "You make me feel less scared." Maya bent down, tears in her eyes, and whispered back, "You're braver than you know." Moments like that reminded them all why the fight had been worth it. William often reflected on the irony. He had once believed money could solve everything, but in the end it was not wealth, but trust, love, and persistence that had saved Maya. He carried that lesson with him always, Evelyn reflected too, knowing her path had led her into the estate at exactly the right moment. She had come seeking healing for herself, and instead had found a daughter. Together, they had created a life none of them expected, but one they cherished beyond measure. The seasons at the Hargrove estate passed with ease now. Winters were filled with fires crackling in the hearth, Maya sketching while Evelyn read aloud and William tended the flames. Springs brought blossoms in the garden, laughter on the swing, and picnics beneath the budding trees. Summers meant long evenings outdoors, the sound of cicadas carrying through the fields. And autumns painted the estate in colours that often inspired Maya's art. She was no longer just an artist. She was becoming a symbol. Her story had been broadcast widely, inspiring other families to keep fighting for their children. Advocacy groups often requested her presence, and she never refused when her schedule allowed. "If my voice can spare even one child what I went through," she told Evelyn once, "then I have to use it." William was proud beyond words. He often attended her events quietly, standing in the back, not as a businessman or benefactor, but as a father watching his daughter change the world. Evelyn too felt pride, but hers was intertwined with a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude that life had given her a second chance at motherhood after unimaginable loss. But their lives weren't only about advocacy or public appearances. At the core, they cherished the ordinary moments, shared breakfasts, evening walks, the comfort of sitting together without needing to speak. These were the treasures they had once thought impossible. Maya often spoke about her journey openly now. She never hid the pain, but she always emphasized the transformation. "My past is still with me," she told a group of students during one visit, "but I've turned it into color. You can take pain and make it into something that speaks." Her words resonated with children and adults alike. Inside the estate, Evelyn and William often found themselves reflecting on the path that brought them here. They remembered the silence that once dominated the house, the fear that nearly consumed them, the lies they had to expose. And they remembered the moment it all shifted, the day Maya whispered, "Don't leave me, Mommy." That single moment had unlocked everything that followed. Now, years later, Evelyn still carried those words close to her heart. They had been more than a plea. They had been a beginning. The future felt open, not bound by fear, but filled with possibility. William began considering projects beyond business, initiatives aimed at helping vulnerable families. Evelyn continued supporting medical watchdog groups, determined to prevent another Rowan from exploiting desperate parents. And Maya prepared for her next exhibition, this time in another country. Her reach was expanding, but so was her confidence. Together, they had built a life that was no longer defined by shadows. The day of Maya's next exhibition arrived with a kind of weight none of them had felt before. Ridgeview Gallery had hosted her first show, but this time the venue was larger, brighter, and brimming with anticipation. Her name had grown in recognition. Critics who once wrote cautious paragraphs about her potential were now writing full-page features describing her as a visionary survivor and a storyteller with brush and color. The exhibition was called From Silence to Light. The title itself carried the arc of her life. Posters lined the streets downtown, and people who had never met her personally felt drawn to the story. Survivors of childhood illness came from neighboring states. Parents brought children who clutched programs like Treasures, and strangers arrived because they had read an article that touched them. Inside the gallery, white walls carried her journey in bold strokes. One canvas showed the Hargrove estate bathed in shadows, a small figure staring out from a window. Another depicted Evelyn's hand resting gently on hers, the brushstrokes soft, protective. A larger piece showed William, not as a businessman in a suit, but as a father kneeling beside a bed, his face painted in weary but unbreakable lines. The progression of canvases moved through despair, fear, confusion, and into hope. Gardens bursting with color, children laughing, skies washed with sunrise. People moved slowly, many wiping tears, others nodding silently as if they understood. The gallery was not quiet in reverence, but alive with whispers, with the sound of connection. Each painting had become more than art. It was testimony. When the time came for Maya's speech, the crowd hushed instantly. She stood at the front, no longer the fragile child who once hid behind silence. She wore a simple dress, her hair tied back, her hands steady as she held the microphone. "Once," she began, "I lived in silence. Doctors told my father I would not survive. People came and went, but no one seemed to hear me. I thought I had no voice. But then someone stayed." She turned, glancing toward Evelyn. The crowd followed her gaze. Evelyn, standing near the front row, pressed a hand to her mouth, tears already welling. "Mama Evelyn," Maya said firmly, "you stayed when no one else did. You listened when my words were barely whispers. You made me believe I could live again. And you, Dad," she turned to William, "you never left my side. Even when you thought you had failed, you stayed. I am here because of both of you." The audience erupted in applause, but Maya lifted a hand gently for quiet. "My paintings are not just mine. They belong to every child who has ever been silenced by sickness, by fear, by neglect. They belong to the families who fought, who cried, who sometimes lost. They belong to anyone who needs to know silence is not the end. There is light after it." For several seconds after she finished, there was no sound at all. Then the applause returned, louder, deeper, some people standing, others crying openly. Reporters captured the moment. But the most important witnesses were William and Evelyn, who stood together, watching their daughter shine in the light she had created. That night, after the gallery emptied and the buzz of the crowd faded, the three of them walked along the riverfront. The city lights shimmered on the water, reflections dancing like brushstrokes. Maya carried herself with calm pride, her medal from school now replaced with the weight of recognition on a larger stage. William walked with his hands in his pockets, but his shoulders were relaxed in a way Evelyn hadn't seen in years. Evelyn herself felt lighter, as if the grief she once thought permanent had finally dissolved completely into gratitude. Life at the Hargrove estate settled into a rhythm that was no longer haunted, but alive. The once cold halls now carried music and laughter. William often cooked, proudly burning pancakes while Evelyn teased him. Maya filled the studio with canvases, some for shows, others just for herself. She loved painting the garden in different seasons, roses blazing in summer, leaves falling like embers in autumn, snow covering the swing in winter. The swing itself had become a symbol. Once it was a place where Maya sat frail and wordless, watched over by a father desperate for change. Now it was a place where she sat with friends, where she laughed, where she sometimes leaned back to watch the stars while Evelyn called her in for dinner. Evelyn often walked through the estate remembering the first day she arrived. She recalled the silence so sharp it felt like a sound in itself. Now those memories felt distant. The house had not only changed, it had been reborn. William, too, reflected often. He thought of how he once lived with guilt so heavy it nearly buried him. But over time, that guilt transformed into purpose. He had joined Evelyn in advocacy, funding programs to monitor experimental drugs, meeting with legislators quietly, using his influence for something beyond profit. "If I can keep even one family from going through what we did," he told Evelyn one evening, "then it will be worth every battle." Maya sometimes joined them in this mission, speaking at conferences or contributing artwork to fundraising events. Her presence always moved audiences more than any statistic could. She was living proof that survival, trust and love could overcome the darkest odds. Letters continued to arrive, not just from strangers, but from families who had once been afraid to speak. One came from a mother whose son had been part of Rowan's trials. "Because of you," it read, "we found the courage to demand answers." Another from a young artist. Your paintings made me believe I can turn my pain into something worth sharing. Maya answered as many letters as she could, sometimes with long replies, sometimes simply with a drawing tucked inside the envelope. Each one was personal. Each one was her way of giving back what she had once been given, hope. Her exhibitions grew in size and reach. She traveled internationally, her work displayed in galleries overseas. Yet no matter how far she went, she always returned to the estate. This is where it began, she told reporters once. And this is where I always return, because this is where I found my voice. One quiet evening, years after the trial, William, Evelyn and Maya sat by the fireplace. The night was calm, rain tapping gently on the windows. They had no event to prepare for, no speech to write, no audience to face. Just family, together. Maya leaned against Evelyn's shoulder, sketching absent-mindedly in her notebook. William sipped tea, his eyes thoughtful. Evelyn broke the silence. "Do you remember," she asked Maya softly, "the first word you ever spoke to me?" Maya looked up, puzzled for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Mommy," she whispered. Evelyn nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes, and that word changed everything." William reached for both their hands. The three of them sat in silence, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of peace, of understanding, of lives intertwined by love and survival. As the years continued, Maya's art became part of academic study. Universities analyzed her paintings not only for technique, but for their emotional resonance. She was invited to lecture, to explain how trauma could be reshaped into creativity. She never presented herself as extraordinary. Instead, she spoke simply. "I was given the chance to be heard, and once you find your voice, you must use it." Evelyn and William aged gracefully, their bond deepening through the seasons. The estate remained their home, filled with reminders of struggle and triumph. They watched proudly as Maya grew into not only an artist, but a leader, someone who carried light into spaces where silence had once ruled. On the 20th anniversary of her recovery, Maya organized an exhibition unlike any other. It was held at Ridgeview Gallery again, but this time she curated it as a retrospective, a journey through her life. The first room displayed her earliest childhood sketches, preserved carefully by William. The next held her teenage works, those first bursts of color. Then the later canvases, international pieces that carried her story outward. The final room was empty except for one large painting, a child standing in a garden, a swing in the background, flanked by two figures. The brushstrokes were bold, the colors warm. The title read, "Home." People walked through in tears, some embracing strangers, others simply standing quietly. For Evelyn and William, it was overwhelming. For Maya, it was closure. She had taken the silence of her childhood and transformed it into a story that would outlive her. As the exhibition ended and the lights dimmed, Maya spoke one final time. "People ask where my strength comes from," she said. "The truth is, I was never strong alone. My father and my mother, they stayed. They believed when I couldn't. And in that belief, I found my way." This story is not just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever felt voiceless. It belongs to you. The applause rose. But in the midst of it, Evelyn and William saw only their daughter, alive, thriving, radiant. The girl who once whispered in silence had become a woman whose voice carried across the world. And for the Hargroves, that was the greatest victory of all.